two sailors on the seas of grace. One man favored by God, and the other despised by men. One was called to do the will of God, and one heard the voice of the devil. One walked with kings, and the other lay down with slaves. Both men were rebels, to whom God extended his hand of grace. The tale of the first man, if you've been around the Christian world very long, is a tale that you'll know. It's a tale you're very familiar with. It's a tale that is often you've seen told to children, and sometimes by children. It's a story of miracles. It's a story of symbols of God, of His power, of His control of the things of this world, of everything in this world. It's a story of prejudice, a story of sin, and a story of grace. It's a story of God's intervention in the life of one man and in the life of an entire people. To many, this story in the little book of the Minor Prophets is kid stuff. It's stuff for little children and not for adults. But if you look deeper, if you look beneath the surface of this story, you'll find the most important message of the entire Bible. Our first story is the story of Jonah. Let's turn there in our Bibles, shall we? Let's see if you can find it. It's in the Minor Prophets. It's about 2/3 of the way through the Bible. Have to wait till everybody gets in.
What is it?
It's Jonah, the book of Jonah 1, verse 1, chapter 1. That's where we're starting. It's nice if you can read along. It's always good for us to be getting a word in ourselves, or reading it ourselves. Raise your hand if you're ready. 859. That's
859.
good. Thank you. That's good. I probably should be reading it in the Pew Bible, and then I'll be with everybody else. Can I take one now? The book of Jonah. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of God. Now, if you know anything about the geography of the region, you know that Tarshish is about as far in the opposite direction of Nineveh as you could go. So he wasn't just kind of trying to get away a little bit. He was trying to get away a lot from what God wanted him to do. Then the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so the ship was about to break up. And then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God. They threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship and laid down and fallen asleep. Amazing. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you're sleeping? Get up and call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us, so that we will not perish." Now each man said to his mate, "Come, let us cast lots, so that we will learn on whose account this calamity has struck us." And so they cast lots, and the lot fell to Jonah. They came to him and said, "Tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country, and what people are you?" He said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." And then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, "How could you do this?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. And so they said to him, "What should we do to you that the sea will become calm for us? For the sea is becoming increasingly stormy." And he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that it is on account of me that this great storm has come upon you." However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even more stormy than before. And then they called upon the Lord and said, "Lord, we earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us, for you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." And so they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Okay. And he made vows. All right. So, what do you notice about this story? What do you notice about it? Who's the righteous man or men in this story? Is it Jonah, the prophet of God?
Yeah.
Is it? Is it?
Yeah.
No. Who's the righteous? Who are the righteous people? Who are the ones making sacrifices to God? Who are the ones calling on the name of the Lord? The sailors. These pagan sailors, right? The pagan sailors, the pagan ship captain. Okay. So, still, the Lord saves Jonah, doesn't he? How's he do it? Let's finish the chapter. Okay. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the stomach of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So the sailors chuck him overboard. The great big fish sees this guy slowly going to the bottom of the ocean, and he says, "Supper is served," right? And he goes up and he just gobbles them up. He just swallows them whole, right? And so what happens then? The whole of the second chapter is Jonah inside the whale praying to God. Now, if you read this prayer, it's all of chapter 2. It's almost a song. You see a little bit about Jonah. Jonah is just sort of gushing praise to God. He's inside this whale, squished inside this whale, and he's saying, "Oh God, you're so great. Oh God, you're so wonderful. What does he say? He said, while I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you in your holy temple." But then he's saying how great he is and wonderful. He said, "I called out in my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I called out from the depths of Sheol," which is the burning fire pit, "and you heard my voice." He's talking about how great God is, right? But then on top of that, he does something else. He does something surprising and negative. He ranks on non-believers. He busts on the kind of people that God sent him to talk to. He says, "Those who regard vain idols forsake your faithfulness, but I will sacrifice to you." He's saying, these people are bad, but I'm going to do what's right. So now, in the midst of this gushy prayer to God, that's full of contempt for other people, for people that don't know God the way He does, right? I see a little the arrangement here. I see something unusual. When Jonah prays the prayer and he gushes up all this stuff and the contempt for the unbelievers, and then Jonah gets barked out by the big fish. That's what happens. So maybe it wasn't the author's intention. Maybe it wasn't what he was intending, but if you look at the layout of the story, if you look at the way the prayer goes, the way it goes is Jonah prays the big prayer, and then the fish gets sick. Jonah prays the big prayer, and the fish barfs him out. So it looks like even the fish had enough of Jonah. And that's where the way it hits me. It just looks like the fish is kind of has a little bit of indigestion and kind of gets rid of the thing that's bothering him. So it looks like when you look at this, the sailors are down on Jonah, the fish is down on Jonah. It looks like everybody is kind of down on Jonah. But and he spends 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. Thinking about that. Thinking about how God was down on him and how God wanted him to do things. But it didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference to Jonah. Now I say everybody was down on Jonah. Everybody except one person was down on Jonah. Everybody except God. Now let's turn to Jonah chapter 3. Nineveh repents. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the proclamation which I am going to tell you." So God comes to Jonah and he gives him a second chance, doesn't he? He goes to Jonah and he says, he comes to him a second time. He doesn't say, "I'm going to burn you for fire for running away from me. I'm going to hit you with some lightning bolts. I'm going to give you some leprosy," or anything like that. He just says, "Okay, here we go again. Now I told you, here we go. Now I want you to go to Nineveh and tell them what I'm going to tell you to tell them. So note that. He tells them exactly what to say. Or he's going to tell them exactly what to say. Okay. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day walk. It was so big it would take 3 days to walk through it, is what it's saying. When Jonah began to walk through the city, on 1 day's walk, he was 1 day into the city, and he cried out and said, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown." Then the people of Nineveh believed in God, and they called a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. And when the word reached the king of Nineveh, he arose from his throne, laid aside his robe from him, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in the ashes. Amazing. He issued the proclamation and said, "In Nineveh, by the decree of the king and the nobles, do not let man, beast, herd, or flock taste a thing. Do not let them eat or drink water. But put man and beast must be covered with sackcloth, and let man call on God earnestly, that each may turn from his wicked way, from the violence which is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent, and withdraw his burning anger, so that we will not perish." When God saw their deeds, and that they turned from their wicked way, then God relented concerning the calamity which he had declared he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. It's an amazing thing. Okay. Now, in this part of the story, okay, we're going to start to see a pattern here. Is who's the righteous person in this story? In this part of the story, is it Jonah, the prophet of God, the man of God? Who repents? Who calls upon the Lord? The Ninevites, these sinful Assyrian Ninevites. Right? They're the people. Again, it's not Jonah. Jonah is a prophet of God. Right? He's called by God. He's God's mouthpiece. Right? He's the big man. He's the messenger. He's the ambassador of God to a world, to a sinful people. But Jonah is just not who you'd expect him to be, is he? He's just not the person that you think he should be. He doesn't meet expectations at all. You'd expect him to be a kind and generous soul, wouldn't you? A loving soul, a person after God's own heart, maybe. But he wasn't, was he? Even if he wasn't at the beginning, you'd think after his time in the fish, maybe he would be. Maybe he would have turned in. You'd think, wouldn't you, that if you were about to die in a storm brought by God, that if you had to be thrown overboard by the sailors because they couldn't be around you and live, you'd think that this would humble you a little bit. You'd think that if God sent a great big fish, if you're sure to die out in the middle of the ocean someplace, you're going to drown, you figured you deserve it because of what you did, and God sends a fish to swallow you up, you're still alive. You'd understand a little bit about grace. You'd understand a little bit about God's miraculous salvation to send you a fish to save you. You think that after that, if God came to you and gave you a second chance to do that came to you a second time to do what He wanted you to do, that you'd look at the world a little differently than you did before. You'd think, wouldn't you, that if having been saved by grace, that you'd be filled up with it, that you'd be changed by it, that it would make you a different person, and it would make you look at the world a little differently, wouldn't it? Jonah should have found a new humility. He should have found a heart filled with love and grace, the way that it had been given to him. But amazingly, he didn't. He didn't. Though he had seen and felt and known the grace of God personally, it didn't change the way he looked at God himself or others. Jonah's eyes were blind to the log in them. Remember how Jesus said, you have a log in your eye or a plank in your eye before you get the speck of sawdust out of the other eye? Jonas had a log in his eye. All he could see was that the Assyrians deserved to die. And let's face it, they did. If you know anything about ancient Assyria, there's caves in Palestine today where you can go and find cave carvings that